Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kell, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, the one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
Welcome into the Small Church Podcast. Robert Kell, we are experiencing a first here this morning.
Yeah, I'm on this side of the world, the interweb side or whatever.
So a year plus of doing the Small Church Podcast, and this is the first time that we've recorded an episode not sitting across the desk from each other. And I got to tell you,
it's a little weird. It's a little weird. We'll see how it goes.
It is. We are recording early this morning, and
we are recording early.
I think we're both kind of dragging a little bit. You went to bed. You told me before we hit record that you went to bed at 7:30 last night. So you're just old. I was at a baseball game until 11 o'clock at night last night, and now we're up and going. And I'm doing basketball camp this week. So we've talked several times that I coach high school basketball, and we're doing our boot camp this week. So 4 hours every day this week, we're running up and down the court with a group of high school guys, and that's been a lot of fun. But the gym that we are in does not have air conditioning, and it's hot. And so yesterday I went straight from 4 hours in an unair conditioned gym. I ran over to have a meeting with you, and you're sitting outside. And so I went from 4 hours in a gym with no air conditioning to sitting outside for an hour with you.
Yeah,
then I
like
went
an hour and a half.
sit an hour and a half with you, and then I went to sit outside in the baseball stadium for like 4+ hours. And we are in the middle of July here in East Tennessee, which for those of you who are in different parts of the country, like maybe Alaska, or maybe we've got some of you that are listening from like Greenland or something like that. It's hot right now. It's hot.
I'm thankful for the rain we're getting. I mean, it had been crazy hot and really dry, and all our yards were just dirt.
Now it's just crazy hot and really humid because of the rain.
Yeah, I can handle the rain.
Unbearably humid.
Yeah, so I'd hate to have a real job that you have to put on like actual like fancy clothes and stuff like that. I do have a real job, but I can be in shorts and t-shirts and ball caps and things like that some days if I need to be. So today's one of those days. So yes, I did go to bed early. I think all this weather change has hit me a little bit. I don't know exactly what I am feeling. And then anyway, then my family started coming to bed after like back in that wing of the house, part of the house, back the hallway, and wing of the house, like my house is big enough to have a wing, but and then I don't know, something, they started stirring and my mind and my body got really active and I couldn't go back to sleep. So I ended up back in the living room, just like staring till like 2:30 in the morning. It's 3 o'clock. So yeah, but I'm good. I got like 6 or 7 hours. That should be fine. It just came in weird chunks. And so here we go.
Hey, it works, right?
We'll see
how you're feeling around 2 or 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah. I've got a lunch appointment today, which will always be fun, having lunch with some friends and one of my kids and some friends. So that'll be good. And then we got a really cool event. The library here in the town where the church is at had some pretty bad water damage inside of their facility months and months and months ago. Things have gotten delayed, just hasn't gotten fixed. And they're doing a children's event wrapped around Jumanji, and they'd reached out and just said, "Hey, we're just wondering if you have a room." And so our auditorium right now has no chairs in it, and it's just got like paper mache jungle stuff, like draped from the lights into the walls and all kinds of stuff. And so it's pretty cool. I'm gonna sit up here and hang out and play some Jumanji music for the library for a while, and just have a good time. And it's really cool that we talk about how do you kind of connect, how do you kind of plug in with your community. And I think just being somebody that they felt comfortable enough reaching out and asking that question was a big starting place. And then we just kind of said, hey, we'd love to do this. And so, just get a chance to kind of serve and partner. And so I think I got plenty going on to keep me awake until it's bedtime tonight, but yeah, it's good.
That's great.
Yep.
So I've got something that I want to give you credit for, because we've talked so much on our show about the many different ways that smaller churches can very cost effectively reach out to their community. And beyond just trying to get new people in, reaching out, but also maybe you have some of the residual that it tells people about your church and you get new people in. And one of the things that we've been trying to do with my basketball team is I lost several players off of my team from last year, and we're needing to recruit some more players, or it's going to be a really, really long season. And so we have a local water park here that is right down the street, and the co-op that we're a part of rented it out for a big homeschool night. And my wife had this brilliant idea after listening to the Small Church podcast and hearing about some of the things that you've done at your church, that she said, why don't we see if we can rent that snow cone machine that Robert's church did, that you guys did for an event that you had a couple weeks or a month or so ago. And let's go set it up there and see if we can't recruit some new boys to come play. So we rented the snow cone machine. We went to Stockpot and bought all of the syrups and the cups and the straws and all of that fun stuff. And we set up shop at Wetlands Water Park for 2.5 hours. We made almost 200 snow cones that we gave away from 3 different flavors, had an absolute blast of a time, and talked to every boy that came our way about wanting to play basketball. And none of them showed any kind of interest. None of them showed any interest whatsoever. But then we had our boot camp this week that was just a few days after this event. And literally not a single boy that we talked to that night cared about basketball at all. But we gave them a flyer when we gave them a snow cone and said, come out, it'll be a great time. And we had 4 boys show up at boot camp.
That's awesome.
From that event for snow cones. And so it got me thinking, we didn't think that we had any success with that event at all. It was fun getting to meet people and give out snow cones, and it cost my family a ton of money in renting the machine and paying for all the ice and all the syrup and all of that. But we got to get out and meet some people, have a good time. But I didn't think, I was pretty discouraged. My wife was like, man, we planted seeds. It was such a great time. We got to serve people. We got to provide all these little kids with a treat. And she's just positive about the whole thing. And me, that whole night, I'm like, not a single kid. We just spent all this money and wasted a whole evening, and not a single person's going to come play basketball. And then these 4 boys walk into the gym, and I remember each of them from having conversations with them that night. And it just got me thinking, sometimes the things that we do, we don't see immediate return or dividends on. And sometimes it's just a few days later, like in my case, or maybe sometimes it's months down the road or years down the road. But it was pretty cool to see that worked, and I give you all the credit for it. And I got thinking that was something that was very inexpensive, that had an impact on our small group of people, that all the time, since it's not what we're talking about today, but some simple way that churches can do something. Apparently people really, really like snow cones in the middle of summer.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me, and I think there's so much of our life, not just these types of moments where we're kind of connecting with people, but just even, maybe as we're starting to lean into like what our conversation and things are today. I mean, everything about it is, as we look at life and we want to invest and we want to grow and we want to do things, we don't always see the growth immediately. We don't always see the change immediately. But if we step in and we start being obedient in that space, and we just obedient to those leadings of the Holy Spirit, and those moments where, hey, I need to think this way, I need to act this way, I need to do this thing. I think in a lot of ways that starts to happen. So that's really cool. I'm glad you got some players, because it's just crazy to me, because I know I'm a few years older than you, but man, if it would have been like, hey, I'm homeschooled and there's basketball, I've been like, I'm playing basketball. Now, I know a few of your kids went to play for their local high schools, and that's good for them. I mean, I hope that really pans out well, and a lot of great opportunity for them. But I just never would have thought we'd be at a point in time in life where so many kids just are like, I think I'll just sit at home and play, digital versions of these games instead of physically getting connected to them and going.
Yeah, that seems to be the norm nowadays. And we need to bring the presidential physical fitness test back into our school system. Did you have to do that when you were a kid?
Let's shame kids who can't do a pull-up like me.
You have to do like 6 pull-ups. I got that little badge, and that badge in the 3rd grade, getting that badge was such a badge of honor. Loved that thing. Wore that proudly.
I mean, I always got it, but it was not, pull-ups weren't an easy part for me, for sure. I never did a lot of pull-ups growing up. So once a year, I'd do them for the week before, just enough to get in shape with it, and then I'd do my 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever you needed to pass, and move on.
Now we just say that if they can walk around the track one time, they pass.
Yeah. I don't know.
I bet there's some parallel to that with the spiritual state of our country.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I would think that just yesterday I was typing up some stuff, and obedience usually comes before understanding. And since I wanted to understand, I began to obey. And I just think that in that same way, kind of, I was thinking about that a second ago when we were talking about this other stuff. I think in that same way, like we want to do well, we want to move through things. I saw that Elon Musk apparently said that he's a cultural Christian. And so so we have so many people that buy into this cultural Christianity, and they live in a way, as we're getting ready to talk about, that goes against what Scripture says and goes against how it is, and they wonder why things don't seem to line up or their life seems complicated. And it doesn't mean, I'm trying to follow Jesus, and my life isn't always easy. I hit walls and spurts and spells and things, but I feel like there's hope. And people just talk about, I have no hope, my anxiety's so high, and all these things, and I'm just like, man, it's a hard place. It's a hard place to be, and I think that just a lack of following Jesus makes it more difficult.
Yeah, one of the things that you're really passionate about, and I'm sorry that we're going down this road because it's not in any of our show notes that we've talked about. It's in nothing that we've prepared or planned for today. But one of your big passions is discipleship and spiritual literacy.
Yeah.
Or biblical literacy, I should say.
I was actually listening to a podcast on that this morning.
And yet we look at our overall Christian culture, and we're seeing a drift away from that in so many congregations. And I really think that what we're seeing, I think, is that it started in the 90s with the seeker-sensitive movement. And you had all these mega churches that moved away from exegetical teaching to these seeker-sensitive, let's make it relevant to everyone from the moment they first walk in our door. And so our Sundays became more like self-help seminars. And our messages became driven around these series that could be a book that you would find in the self-help section of Barnes & Noble and not in the religious section of Barnes & Noble, or in the spiritual development section of Barnes & Noble even. And what we've seen, I think, over the last 10 years or so is that a lot of your larger churches have tried to start pushing away from that and get back to more exegetical teaching. But the trickle down effect of a lot of the smaller churches is they tend to be 10, 15 years behind what some of the larger churches are doing, is now a lot of our smaller churches are beginning to take on that mindset that the more progressive churches were leaning into in the 90s and early 2000s. And when, as we've seen, anywhere from 70 to 90% of the churches in America are classified as smaller congregations, smaller churches, the vast majority now of our churches are shying away from biblical literacy and going more towards self-help. And you even look beyond just what's being taught on Sunday morning. Sunday school is becoming less and less of a thing in our congregations across the country, across the world, probably. Although I can't say that I'm very up to speed and educated on what's happening in the church landscape in other parts of the country, as I probably should be. So it's hard for me to speak to that very well. But then you're even seeing it with, the decline of participation in things like Bible Bowl programs and things like that we used to really place an emphasis with our kids on teaching them scripture, on having them to understand. And now you're seeing kids that have grown up in the church. They've been very active in the church for their entire lives that are getting into middle school and high school. And some of the just simple Bible stories that we saw on our flannel graph board when we were little kids growing up that they're not aware of, they have no understanding of.
So total sidebar, I really want a good flannel graph set, and I want a really good set of handbells. And these are things that I need them in my life desperately. Like the content would be so fun. I think a couple of things, and then I think we can transition here pretty easily. Jesus changed the teaching style for so many. And so as pastors and teachers, I don't disagree that the seeker movement was not the best thing. Kind of like I love Dr. Richard Ross, and I know that he was one of the founding guys with the True Love Waits movement, and I understand what purity culture did, just like I understand the seeker sensitive thing. And I don't think that everything that happened in that that has happened out of that, was the intent of what happened when it started. So in that space, it's really hard when you've got a Willow Creek or somebody like that that's doing some things, and then you get every other church that doesn't, maybe. I'm being a little critical here maybe, but you get other churches trying to copy that maybe don't have as skilled or talented as leaders, don't have as many leaders, you don't have as skilled a communicator, and maybe they take that model and they do things a little bit different, and then it kind of spirals a little bit as it tries to kind of trickle down into other churches and things. But Jesus kind of flipped this narrative, and he started to tell stories, and he taught these more what feels really to be, as you read through the Gospels, even though he quotes a lot of Old Testament, it feels to be these very topical. Sermon on the Mount, I'm going to give you, over these 3 chapters, 20 different topics that we're going to work through and we're going to talk about. And I think that idea was really what pastors were trying to do, and kind of sit in that space of Jesus a little bit more, which I can respect that. I just think the teaching got away a little bit. And then on the flip side, you talk about Bible drill programs or Bible bowls or whatever, the denomination people grew up in, whatever those things were called. I think there was a lot of good with that, but I think at the same time, there was a lot of, if a kid can quote these verses, that might mean more than if they understand these verses. And so like the pendulum swing of both of these things has been really tough. And I think that's why I'm sitting in guys so much more, like John Mark Comer right now, with what Dallas Willard. That's why I'm, biblical literacy, biblical worldview are things that I talk around and I enjoy in conversations personally in my life, because what I would like to see and what I would like to be a part of is a movement and a change in a group of people, that we shift our lives to align to the ways of Jesus and to the ways of the Father, that what He commands and what He desires for us, that we do. And, and last week we were talking about, Sabbath, and, today we're making a transition to kind of, a partnering word, that really just continue in this conversation, in some ways. And I think that's part of it. When you look at these practices that John Mark and Dallas Willard talk about, or Richard Foster, so many people that talk about the disciplines and the practices that we need to go through. And when you look at what Jesus said and how the Old Testament works through these same concepts and ideas, it's just these steps, these ways that when we align our lives and we actively pursue Him. So, I think the seeker movements and Bible programs for kids and things had a lot of really good and a lot of struggle, and the tension tends to be, when we start trying to copy and mimic people, as opposed to going, hey, that's a cool idea. How do I implement that in my space, at my scale?
So you had a nice little segue transition there, but I'm going to interrupt it for a minute because I've just got to get back to something. You called it Bible drill. I've never heard that before.
Welcome to the Independent Baptist South, baby. That's it, man.
Bible drill. So did you go to Bible drill competitions?
Yeah, we'd stand up there and hold our Bibles between our hands and, kind of hand on each side of the Bible. And then they would say a verse or something, and you just kind of, boom, you had to go through, and then you'd step forward when you found it, or, and I mean, I know for a fact there was people that would be, you want to think I'm sounding like I'm holier than I am with this, but like, I know there's people who would like step forward with those things and just hope they didn't call on them. And then sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't, but I was always too nervous they would call on me. So I was lived out of fear more than anything. So I didn't win a lot of those things, but yeah, you just kind of flipping through hardback Bibles and things. But I remember sitting at lunch with a buddy of mine that went to church, and he could quote the books of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and he could say them just as fast going from Revelation to Genesis. There's things about the Bible that I understand that today's generation I don't think does as much. And, digital, and this may be a less redeemable quality of technology, but digital has kind of made that harder and complicated. Because I can go in and I can set my Bible app to be in alphabetical order. I don't have to look through Old Testament, New Testament. People feel like they don't need to understand a rhythm of the scriptures. And so, I got that stuff when I was a kid, and I think it helped. But yeah,
When I got my first Bible with tabs, man, that was a game changer.
I'm trying to think if I
ever
ever
had to go
had
to the
one of
table of
those.
contents anymore.
I don't think I ever had one of those. Oh man, like memorizing the Bible, like the books of the Bible, that was like first grade stuff. I remember like
what did it for
first
me?
Grade. But
there was one of the very first Christian rap groups was a rap group named POD. Do you remember POD?
Yeah, Payable on Debt.
No, not POD. What was it? POD was the secular group with Sonny as the lead singer. What was that group? PID. It was PID. Preachers in Disguise. Preachers in Disguise. And they had a rap it was just called The Bible. And they did the books of the Bible. And the Old Testament, they got them in the wrong order. But then the New Testament, they were spot on. They went, there's Matthew, Mark, Dr. Luke, and John, Acts, Romans, and 1, 2 Corinthians. There's Galatians, Ephesians, and Philippians. You got Colossians, and Thessalonians, Little Timmy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrew. The book of James got 1, but Peter's got 2. Oh, John's got 3, and the next is Jude. It's just a little bitty book that you can't exclude. And we end up at Revelations, and I'm proud to say that there's a rapture, and you'll be caught away.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
I more remember the McDonald's rap from their menu back in the
Big
day.
Mac DLT, a quarter pounder with some cheese fillet, a fish, a hamburger, a cheeseburger, a Happy Meal. That one.
Yeah, that's more. I never heard the rap song, but then again, I grew up in a very different space where, like, Christian and rap didn't belong in the same sentence unless it was the devil writes Christian rap.
Except for Carmen, right? You could do.
No, he would have been the devil too.
Oh,
we weren't doing Carmen.
Wow.
No, wow. It was very much we were kind of living in the Salty the Singing Songbook world. where I went to
Hey,
church at and stuff.
did you
Dude,
do
I love
Salty and the
Salty.
Salters?
I don't remember. It's been a long time. I mean, I was in all that stuff. I love to sing and perform and do things. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah, good times. I hated Bible Bowl. Man, I hated it. I couldn't even get out of the qualifying rounds of my Sunday school class.
I don't know that I loved it.
I didn't even make the play-in tournament of Bible Bowl.
Um,
I've always thought, I've often wondered about, we had these same kids that won every single year, and they won the Sunday school, and then they won the grade level, and then they won the whole church, and they'd go on to cities, and they'd go on to nationals. And I often wondered, I wonder what they're up to now. I wonder what they're doing. I wonder if they've planted 4 churches. I wonder if, I need to look some of those guys up and just rub it in their faces that I now do a podcast for small church leaders.
They may have a successful podcast now.
That's right. They may have people who actually listen to their podcast on the Bible Bowl. Yeah,
I love that stuff, and I think there's a lot of really good things. Like, I mean, I do think there's a value, and honestly, though, I don't like. I've worked through some of that stuff with my boys, but I don't know that my boys could just sit and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and all the way through 66 books. I don't know how quickly and how well they could do that. They have a good understanding of where things are in the scriptures, but yeah, that was just, it, like I said, I'm talking like kindergarten, first grade. It was on the walls, and they were working us through those things from the time I can remember talking inside of Sunday school classes. I was learning that.
So you segued on this before, that we've done sort of this little mini series on rest and rejuvenation. And last week we touched a little bit on the idea of sabbatical, but wanted to dive into that deeper. And I know that some of our listeners right now are saying, you guys are 28 minutes into this show and you're just now getting to the point, maybe the small church podcast needs to take a sabbatical. But wanted to spend some time today really diving into this concept of sabbatical. I'm amazed at how many Christian leaders, how many vocational ministry leaders either have never taken a sabbatical, never even thought of a sabbatical, or some that aren't even really all that educated and aware on what it's about and what it's for. And so today we wanted to spend some time talking about this biblical concept of sabbatical. And again, we touched on it a little bit last week, but want to dive into it a little deeper today. And so, Robert, what's your initial thoughts when you hear the word sabbatical?
Yeah, I mean, I understand Sabbath and sabbatical are kind of rootly connected when you start looking at grammar. But I view them as very, very, very different. When I think of Sabbath, I think of a time once a week we should take 24 hours to align, focus, step away from our vocation to focus our hearts and minds, towards the Father and kind of realign ourselves. When I think of sabbatical, I think more of a period in time that we get away from, like, that we actually aren't doing our job. So I know churches that every 10 years their pastor gets a 6-month sabbatical where he does not come to work for 6 months or a year or something like that. I saw JP, John Compacluta, post this week that he's getting away for a little bit. He talked about divert daily, withdraw weekly, abandon annually. And he does like a week once a year that he just gets away, and it's a rejuvenation thing. And so that is kind of what I thought. Now, I think there's some truth to that, and I think there's some misconceptions and some problems with it. But like, just to answer your question, that's where I'm at. Like, Sabbath is a weekly thing where we turn our hearts in a line, and my understanding for most of my life of a sabbatical has been this time when you've served long enough, you get a length of time, which, I've probably never made it long enough at a church or a job to get to that place. But but when you've served long enough, you get, a month, 6 months, a year off after a length of time, and it's just designed to let you exhale and get away. Although I think people many times probably misuse and abuse that time away, because I think there's definitely a biblical purpose to it as well. So,
why do you think it's so overlooked?
Well, one, I think the vast majority of the world doesn't do Sabbath, so
If you're not
we
starting
aren't.
small, you're not going to go big.
Yeah, and so we have no real concept of Sabbath at all. We work 7 days a week. We do what we do, and I think sometimes too, and this is the tough thing, like if sabbatical, and I think you and I are probably going to agree on the big principle of sabbatical. We're probably going to have some different opinions on the fleshing out of a couple of these things. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We talk about this stuff a lot, and so I feel like that's where it will be. I think that the tension comes in, though, is that we view this from sabbatical. I almost never, very few companies do I hear talk about a sabbatical, even Christian companies, for their staff. You may have a better understanding because you do a little more coaching inside of that space than I do. Um, but it always seems to be a church thing. All of a sudden, like, oh, the pastor's been here 10 years and the people have driven him crazy. And I think that a lot of times people just kind of go, I don't get a sabbatical and I work twice as hard as that bum. And I mean, I'm just being
Yeah, I would
transparent.
say where I think we see it the most frequently is in higher education. That it's pretty frequent in higher education.
College, that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah. And it's something where they're just investing and investing, and they're teaching and they're teaching, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, you need a break before we find you jumping off top of a building one day.
Yeah, but typically that break for higher education is to study something, to go away and work on your book, to go and study a new process, to work on your dissertation or your thesis, and so you'll take a sabbatical to go do that. It's really not grounded in the theology of rest.
And yes, and I think there's some. So we talk about, like, in scripture. I know one of the conversations you and I have is around land and things like that. And so 6 years and one to rest, 6 and one to rest. The people, though, in resting the land for a year, they didn't just sit and watch the dirt blow. I mean, they had to take care of the animals still. They had a lot of work and things they did, but there is definitely a freedom in some time that they've got. And I think that's the question, is how are we handling and managing that? And so, people who are in higher education or in ministry or CEO of a company or whatever, okay, you're not going to be able just to get up and sit and watch Netflix all day and eat bonbons and go work out to keep the bonbon weight off over this, month, 6 months, year that you have off. But like you have an entire part of your life that you're no longer doing. And so it frees up some time, and that time has to be, I think with what you just said, we agree on this concept here, is that time has to be, as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, it has to be something that we orient ourselves to the Father, and we take that time to reflect, to kind of push in. And so, hey, I normally have to work 8 hours, 10 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week. Now, which again, 7 days is the problem. That's a whole other conversation that we kind of talked about last week. But I've got this time now, so I still have to do this. I need to do this, but I have 2, 3, 4 hours a day that is not being occupied by my job, by my career for this window. And I need to rest in the Father in that moment. And I need to let, as a follower of Jesus and things, there's something I need to do in that space of aligning my heart to Him. I mean, that's my thoughts. I mean, where are you at kind of in that thinking?
Yeah, so sabbaticals are one of my favorite things to work on with pastors in my coaching and consulting. It's something that I've had the honor to help probably 24 men create a sabbatical plan and help lead them through a sabbatical plan. And it's interesting, the different dynamics that we find in this when guys are coming in. When a church has agreed to allow their pastor to take a sabbatical, and I start working with them on planning what that sabbatical is going to look like. I think some of the biggest questions that always come up are how long? How long is the sabbatical going to be when we start? And
how long, how often would be my thought. How often do you do it, and how often?
Yeah, I think that, and those two really go together. You were talking about the guy who has his philosophy of 1 day, 1 week, or whatever it was that you said.
Yeah, a day a week, a week a month. A day a week, a week. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, I just went blank. I'd have to look it back up here real quick. Go ahead. But anyway, continue.
Well, I was just thinking if it was going to be a day a week a month, a year, I wonder if they're hiring, because I'd love to take a week off every month. But a lot of guys I know, especially guys in larger churches. So I want to preface this by saying I don't know that I've ever seen a small church pastor that does this. But my pastor growing up, he took 2 months every summer as sabbatical. That, he had the church in Las Vegas, but they had a lake house in Minnesota. And he took 2 months every summer to get away for a sabbatical. Not a lot of churches can do that. Okay. This was a very large church. They had the staff that could come in, and the church leadership just really saw that as a value to him. And he would come back with his entire year worth of teaching outlines and vision for the church ready to go. So it wasn't just him going to the lake and fishing all day. There was a purpose to his sabbatical. The most often practiced or initiated sabbaticals that I see are either 40 days or 90 days. The biblical concept of taking a year off just really isn't practical, I think, for most people, right? And if you were going to take a year off, I think you're going to completely disconnect from your church, if that was the idea. So I don't know that I've ever seen that happen effectively. I think 40 days is way too short. I don't think that there's enough time in 40 days to do everything that a sabbatical should do for you. So whenever we're planning a sabbatical for someone, we're helping someone kind of blueprint their sabbatical. 90 days, I think, is kind of the sweet spot that we find. And typically your church can carry the baton for that bit of time. But it also gives you time to go through the different phases of sabbatical. And it's interesting to see where the person is at. And I think for each person, the need for sabbatical is different. Some of them, it's because of burnout and they need this time. For some of them, it's because of a personal crisis that they're going through, that they need healing and restoration to take place personally within them. For some of them, it's just that it's time, that it's something that needs to happen. And so we always try to structure our sabbaticals with if it's a 90-day sabbatical, or even if we've had some do 60 days. And so then we just split it into thirds. And the first third of that sabbatical is for rest, that this is a time for you to just rest and regroup. And so a lot of that we work in some. We've talked a lot about our spiritual renewal days. We'll work in a lot of those times where you're just going to go and sit and be with God for a while. Maybe it's once a week during that first trimester of your sabbatical, but it's really to just give you spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical rest, to let your body rest. Then the second of that trimester is a time for research and rejuvenation. And so this is where we'll have you go and visit other churches, go to a conference, go to a seminar, go take a class at your local community college or local Bible college or seminary, if you're lucky enough to have one local to you. Even if you're just auditing that class, get set in. But this is a time where you're growing. Okay, so you're growing. You're getting new, fresh ideas. You're rejuvenating your spirit. So your rest. Now you're rejuvenating your spirit. You're doing all sorts of different things that are preparing you to come back. And then that third trimester is you're taking everything that you've done in the first two trimesters and you're creating a plan for what happens when you get back. So that when you get back, you've got clear vision of what life looks like when you get back. And for different people, again, this looks completely different. And so depending on what you're coming into your sabbatical with, if what you're arriving back from your sabbatical is really predicated on what that sabbatical was for. If that sabbatical was you were on the verge of burnout and you were struggling with faith crisis, then what we're designing and orchestrating that sabbatical around is you. We're getting you right. And so your plan for coming back is, how do I not get into this place again? What are the things that I've learned about myself? What are the things that I've learned about my God over the course of this sabbatical? And what plan do I have in place that is going to carry me through my return back to my church and back into the real world? If maybe your sabbatical was just time, it was just something that you were doing because it was time for that, then maybe you're coming back with a completely new ministry plan or a revised ministry plan, both for yourself, for your church. And so I think that really looks different depending on where you're at. And it's incredible to see what 60 days, 90 days can do in the life of someone when they're really on purpose. We've also seen guys that have gone on sabbatical and not done any of that. And they've just used it as an extended vacation time. And most of the time, those are the guys that don't make it very long when they get back.
Yeah, I mean, in those spaces, you come back bitter, you come back frustrated. And JP's stuff was divert daily. So find some time daily, withdraw weekly, take a Sabbath, and then yearly get a week. And so that, but yeah, people, when you just get away for that time and the rest isn't intentionally about moving you towards the Father, I think you just get bitter and you get frustrated and you just look and you go, I've known one or two churches, and honestly, I gotta be careful to say this. It's not really churches that I've been a part of. I just know churches that have done like the pastor takes a year, like at 10 or 15 years, gets an entire year off. And to survive that, there almost has to be an unhealthy, that sounds bad. There is definitely a love for that man, that leader in that space, that could borderline obsessive, I think, in those moments. Because, I mean, just like you said, to get a year off, I haven't met with my small group. We talk and we text some and things like that, but I haven't sat with them in like 5 weeks, and I feel like it's been 6 years since I've seen them. My heart is absent from them. We rotate some. I was off this past Sunday. I was at another campus the Sunday before, and so I haven't even seen my friends, like even hug their neck on a Sunday morning for 3 weeks now. And I feel like I have not seen them in months, and I just don't know how you survive a year off if you're not even going to your church. Like, I guess if you show up and somebody else is preaching, then you're still dealing with problems and stuff. But anyway, I don't know. But yeah, so I like the idea. So how often do you think people should take a sabbatical?
Every church that I've ever done an employee handbook for, that I've ever written, created an employee handbook, we did what you were saying earlier. Every 7th year, you were eligible for one.
Okay.
Yep, every
And so
seventh year you are eligible for a 3-month. And I think some keys, if you're a church leader and you're listening to this and you're saying that's something that we haven't established in our church, that we've never practiced in our church, I think there's a couple of key things that I want to say very, very quickly that are critical to this. The church needs to plan for this, okay? This needs to be planned well in advance. It needs to be communicated both to your staff, even if that's a staff of one. It needs to be communicated to your staff that this is something that we value. This is something that we are preparing for, and it needs to be communicated to your congregation well in advance. It is not something that you say, all right, we're giving you, this is, I'm saying this to the church elders, deacons, not the staff people right now. So if you're listening to this, this is not something that you say, we're giving you this, you get 3 months of unpaid leave of absence. And you can't expect your pastor to get anything out of that if now they're worrying about how they're going to pay their mortgage and keep their lights on. And I've actually seen that happen, that churches approve a Sabbath, support the Sabbath, but they say you're responsible for everything in the Sabbath, in that Sabbath time. And it just doesn't work. I actually had one guy who during his Sabbath went and took a part-time job, and it completely defeated the purpose of the Sabbath. And so it takes planning. It does take planning, and the church needs to be a part of that. You can bring someone like Higher Ministries in to assist with that and help with that, and we love doing that, but the church needs to be a part of that. And if part of the Sabbath is in how we design our Sabbaths in that second trimester, that you're going to conferences, you're going and visiting churches that you like, the church needs to pay for that. The church needs to budget for that. It's not, you're not telling your pastor, hey, we're sending you to do all of these things. I know a lot of guys will go, they'll do a week or two on a short-term mission trip as part of their Sabbath. And I think that's incredible. I think that's great. The church needs to pay for that. This is something that the church is doing for their pastor, not something that the pastor is doing for their church. Now, hopefully the pastor comes out of this with a renewed sense of vision and purpose for their church. That's great. But you guys need to be thinking and planning well ahead of time, preparing financially for what this is going to look like, and give them a budget. Give them a budget and know what's going on. You can't just say, all right, you've got $10,000 for this Sabbath, go have fun. And no, you need to be a part of that, know what they're doing, have regular reporting on how that's going, what's taking place, and what progress is being made, what growth is happening. And you have to communicate it well in advance to your congregation. I've seen that be flubbed several times before, where the inner circle in the church knows what's happening, but the general church attender doesn't know until they're being announced the week before that you won't be seeing pastor again for the next 3 months. And that's a shock to people.
Yeah, if you're going to take mid-May to mid-August, you're going to take 90 days, for in that window there. You can't you can't start letting people know, May 7th, that on May 15th you will no longer see your pastor until August 21st. Also, I think that, like you said, you can't be going, oh, hey, it's beginning of May. Who's going to speak the next 13 Sundays? Look, we've got one more week of this guy, and then we got 13 Sundays that no one's going to be here. Like, you've got to have that stuff in place, because what will happen is, I think even if the heart of the leadership is there, when the pastor steps away, there's going to be a level of, you're going to have somebody that's worked for their company, that's your elder or deacon or whatever, that has worked for their company for 30 years, has never taken a vacation, never had a day off. Gone in with the flu, COVID, everything. Like, literally went to the hospital on their lunch break to watch their kid be born and went right back to work. And if things don't go smoothly, they are going to, immediately, 2 or 3 weeks in, and now they're still 10, 11 weeks. of this thing, they're just going to be so frustrated, and they're going to be angry, and they're going to start the lynch mob mentality with some stuff. And so, like you said, there's prep that needs to go into these things, but also, to use the land analogy from Scripture, there was prep that went in. You saved over a 6-year period to get ready for a
For your
one.
year of playing Lane Furlough, yeah.
And I think that in that space, the problem so much right now is it's just so hard to do these things. And I told you yesterday, and I mean, just being really transparent, I mean, we've got a vision series coming up, and I'm having to be really careful to not be bitter inside of stuff, because I go, man, like, I want people to be faithful. I really don't care about their money. I want people to be faithful to what God's called them to, because I know as we're obedient, God works in that obedience, and we see things happen. And so one of our values is generosity for our church. And so we're going to teach each of our values. We have 4 values. We're going to teach each of them over a 4-week period. And that's just going to be really hard for me to not kind of say and sound like a grumpy old man, like, hey, you say you can't tithe, you say you can't do this, but you had no problem paying $750 to go see Morgan Wallen. And that's kind of the same thing when you're looking at leadership. You're going, hey, you're saying you can't do this. You're saying now you're mad because of what's going on here. Oh, you felt like this was important, and so you stepped in, but you didn't do any of the work. And as leaders, if we know we're going to get to do this, and we are doing the right things, we may have to drive that bus a little bit and get a little grumpy one day and go, hey, we need to write out who's speaking over these 13 weeks. Oh, hey, are any of you all, where are you going on vacation? If you're a deacon and you're speaking in this week, or you're an elder and you're speaking on this week, oh, you're on vacation? It's probably not wise to put you on that Sunday then if you're going to be gone. And so, because I'm not here to fill in for you. You can't go, well, man, you got a big old book, it's all the same. It never changes. Just get up there and say something.
And I know that some of you are listening to this right now and you're saying, nobody does that. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. The number of times that I've had someone call me on a Thursday and say, is there any way that you can come fill the pulpit this Sunday? We had a mix up with our scheduling, and we had an elder who was supposed to be teaching. I'm on vacation and they're actually going to be out of town too. And I'm like, and that's in 3 days and you're just now realizing it.
Yeah.
So yes, this does happen, and it happens more frequently than I think any of us would like to admit.
Yeah, so I just think it's there's a lot of prep to it. There's a lot of prayer that needs to go into it, and I think that's one of the things too is, we've talked about this before. Like, when I'm fortunate to be a part of a network, I've got you in my life, and I talk about a lot of ministry things, and so sometimes we send videos or articles and things, and sometimes they're videos that we're just going, I'm speechless. How did that video ever make the internet? How's this person not, been canceled on some level? And then sometimes you get things you go, man, I'm ready to teach that on Sunday. And the question always comes, especially when I'm sitting with my buddies that are the other campus pastors, is, hey, we've been talking about this for a year, and this guy just said it really, really clean. How do we preach that on Sunday morning? How do we do that without blowing up all the people who are in the room who haven't been on the same journey we've been on for the last 6 weeks, 6 months, a year? And I think that's the thing, is how do you prayerfully step into something like start with a Sabbath. Start with a weekly Sabbath, 24 hours. My recommendation would be sunset to sunset. Choose a day. I understand some people might be, no, you have to do a certain day. I'm saying find a day. Start at sunset one day, go to sunset the next day, and let your sleep work for you in that space a little bit, and find a Sabbath. But as you're praying about what a sabbatical could look like and how you get away and how you step into that space, I would really just kind of go, okay, how do I bring my leadership along with this? And that's something where, Tony, you especially can be a real value and resource to the people who are listening, way more than me on this topic.
Yeah, I love to do it. So if that's something that your church has in the plans for the next year, maybe it's a 2025 thing, you need to begin the planning for that now. There's lots of prep work that goes into it. lots of planning that needs to take place. And we'd love to be a part of that discussion with you and help you with that. So you can find out more about that, higherministries.com. We would love to help out. So we're going to transition a little bit here. We're about out of time. And something that you and I have talked about off the mic that we're pretty excited to dive into and a little nervous to get into, because our local community made national headlines over the course of the last couple of weeks. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that with Headline News. So, Robert, a couple weeks ago, a couple days ago, I'm not sure how long ago it was. You're more familiar on the timeline. I was doing my morning routine that we've talked about, where I scroll through the headlines on USA Today and try to catch up to speed on what's happening in the world that I live in. And I saw this headline that made national news, secular national news. It was in USA Today on a church that was doing something pretty controversial. So much so that it made the national headlines. And I didn't think much about it. I was so caught up in everything else that was going on in the country and in the world and in my day that I didn't read that. I just saw the headline and thought, wow, that's something that I need to come back to, and actually flagged it on the app to go back and read later, which I never did. And then a couple days ago, I'm scrolling through my top 10 most popular articles on churchleaders.com, which if you don't subscribe and get the daily or weekly emails from churchleaders.com, it's something you should do, because some great resources and insights and just good laughs and a good cry every now and then as well. But looking through the top 10 articles of the week, and I see it again, this headline, I'm like, oh, I never went back and read that. So I start reading it, and then I'm shocked when I see that the church that they're talking about is a church right down the road from us. So, Robert, why don't you give all of our listeners kind of the synopsis of what happened a few weeks ago here at a local congregation?
Well, yeah, I mean, a church in Johnson City, Tennessee, did a raffle around the 4th of July for around the 4th of July. So the raffle started in June. And people could put a ballot in if they went to the church, and they could put a ballot in, and they had a chance to win an AR-15 rifle with a scope on it. And so it blew up. Like, the local news got on it, got on the topic, and was running a story on it. I actually was doing some work with our local Christian radio station, which is kind of got several stations inside of the Southeast. I was doing some work with them last week, and somebody from like 6 hours from here came up to me and was like, dude, what's up with, and so like they were asking questions about it, and I'm going, and I don't know. I don't go to church there. I don't have a clue, but yeah, so on like July 7th, they gave away an AR-15. The person apparently had to go pass a background check and a gun safety course to get that level of gun before it could be officially handed off. But yeah, that's the story, and it was definitely interesting for sure.
So the church said that they were doing this to be a blessing to their community. Something that you said that I didn't know, and I'm kind of looking through the article to see if I can find more details on this, is you said that you got a raffle ticket if you were a member of the church. Was this something that they opened up to the community?
My understanding is that you just go in and drop in, or you could sign up for a raffle. You just sign up for it. So if you went, you could go, anybody could go and put their name in the box. It didn't have to be a church member. Just anybody, if you went to the church over a few weeks, you could put in the raffle. And it may not have even been that. Anyway. So you just got to put your name in a raffle.
So did you have to attend a church there to get a raffle ticket to put it in? Or is it something that they were passing out raffle tickets out in the community and then did the drawing, and they wanted you to be at church for the drawing? How did that work? Do you know?
I you Man, I feel like I knew this, and now I'm questioning myself because it wasn't in the article we read. I'm 99% sure that you had to be at the church and put your ticket in, and put a ballot in for the raffle. And I
All
don't
right.
think it cost you anything. I think it was 100% free. You just put your name in and went from there.
So I'll break the ice on this. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. I think that it's such a egregious message that is being sent out that I have a real problem with this from a standpoint of you're saying you're doing it to be a blessing to the community. How is this a blessing to the community? You and I have talked at length off of the microphone about our thoughts on gun control and gun violence and all of that. And what is the point of auctioning off an AR, not auctioning off, giving away an AR-15 rifle and saying that that's a blessing to the community? I'm not getting this here.
Yeah, I've said this before on the show, and I'm all for the Second Amendment. I think people can own guns. I'm personally not a big gun guy. I'm a pretty low violence, I'm pretty much a no violence kind of guy. I probably need to have some conversations around my addiction to MMA a little bit. That's why I say low violence, because I do like watching boxing and things like that in sports. But I feel like that's two guys choose to get into a ring, and there's people there to make sure they're as best they can, safe and stuff like that. But I'm a pretty low violence guy, and just personally don't care a lot for guns. I think the thing for me is that put aside like everybody's views on military and war and all those types of things, and the different opinions on that. I don't know that I see the full value of just a normal everyday American owning an AR-15. It's just, and that's my opinion, and I get a right to that. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying that's just my opinion on that. I just struggle with it.
And I look at this picture that's all over the internet of the winner on stage, and everyone's fine. And even looking at the people in the background, the worship team that's up there, and the huge smiles on their faces. Someone is proudly displaying their AR-15 rifle on stage at church. I'm like, when did this become what we're about? You know, that we're up here, instead of exalting Jesus, we're exalting a gun on our stage, and not just a gun, but an assault rifle.
Well, and in the article on church leaders, I mean, he actually says if somebody's trying to harm me, I want to put them down. I'm not looking to give them a chance after my first shot for them to get a chance to get a second. And so, I mean, it's somebody in the article that's connected to the church said that, and Holmes, the pastor. He said, he also goes on to say that if you were in North Korea, China, Canada, you couldn't do this, but in the United States, we can. And he's like, it's completely 100% legal.
Just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Yeah, and I think that's the better part of judgment, wisdom. I just went blank on kind of that little quote, but not because you can do it, but should you do it? And so, again, I've got friends that would 100% disagree with me. They own these guns, and they 100% disagree with my view on it. And honestly, I don't talk about it a ton. I mean, I don't feel like it's something I'm going to spend a lot of bandwidth working through. But yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan. And I think, too, in a world today where I got a lot of buddies that are in law enforcement and military and things like that. I've been really fortunate to serve in a couple of communities where I was in military towns, mainly Air Force, and I literally friends all over the world that I'm super thankful for them and what they do, and they serve, and that they feel called to that space. I just feel like when we put these types of things in the hands of, some people would say that because military and police kind of, especially if you start carrying these types of weapons, that they've mentally kind of brainwashed you. And I don't know, I'm not smart enough to understand that. but they've been trained and equipped, and you start putting that in my family's hands, and we're not. I mean, even if we went and did gun training, we're not AR-15 psychologically trained and equipped to really handle that type of weapon. And so I just feel like with where our law enforcement and military and things are struggling as much as they are right now, you give an everyday human a gun like this doesn't seem wise. That's just my thing. It doesn't seem wise.
Yeah, and I can even disagree with that in some sense. Now, I don't have an assault rifle. I have no plans to have an assault rifle, but my personal belief is that an average American should not be able to walk into a gun store and do a 30-second background check and walk out with an assault rifle. I don't see any reason. I agree with you in the fact that I don't see any reason why the average American should need to have one of these in their home. Okay. I agree with that completely. That's not the issue that I have with this article, because that is the world that we live in. It is legal to do that. And a lot of people have differing opinions on that. So that's fine. My problem comes in where this church has made it the focal point of their service that day.
Yeah.
They've taken time that was supposed to be pointing people towards Jesus, and instead it's pointed people towards an assault rifle, an AR-15. And they've taken something, and I would just simply ask the question. Anytime I was doing something in a service that I thought had the potential to be controversial, I always ask myself, is the risk worth the reward? Is the point that I'm trying to make with what I want to say or what we're going to do here, is the payoff worth the potential harm that is going to be done? And if there was even a hint in my mind of no, then it was something that I didn't do, that we shelved because it just wasn't worth it. Is there another way that we can accomplish what we're trying to do? Was there something else that these people could have done? If it truly was to be a blessing to the community, there are a lot of other ways that you could have blessed your community than putting a weapon like this in the hands of someone. Even if your goal was to bring people in, which I'm not going to speak for the leadership. My guess is that the point of this was to try to get new people into the church. We're giving away a gun. Let's get new people to come in. There are a lot of other ways that you could have done that than by doing something as controversial as this. The old adage, all
I see what you're saying, though, while you're processing that.
All press is good press. There you go. All press is good press. I don't necessarily know that that's the case in the church world, that all press is good. In fact, I would say it is not the case in the church world. All press is not good press.
I think there's just a lot of things that you could say around that, a lot of conversation you could have. And again, I sometimes will say, and I've said it on here, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about that, because, I mean, I take a pretty peace path as much as I can to things. I mean, I've never thrown a punch in my life. Never fired a gun in my life that wasn't Nerf, paintball, or BB. I mean, it's just, I mean, and I haven't, I mean, outside of Nerf guns, I haven't fired any of those in 10 years or more. And so and it's not that I have an issue with paintball or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, I just pretty kind of try to be peace driven. I got enough anger and stuff in my life anyway that I'm dealing with. I don't want to add that to the thing. So.
Yeah, I'm going to make a last assumption here. And the fact that the article ends with, we have reached out to the leadership of the church for comment, and we have not heard back. And I just updated the article. That is still there. So they're not, which makes me think that maybe they're not too happy with the negative publicity that they're getting from it anyways. And I just question, was the end result worth what you put into it? Was another way to do that. All right.
Well, but even he said in the article, like people say, don't you know that this is a very dangerous weapon and that it breaks bones? And his response is, well, yeah, if you shoot it right. And I'm just going, that approach to this is not a Jesus. I would have this conversation with him. And again, I could walk to his church from my house. I would have, and I'll sit with him. If somebody from that church is listening and you're offended, call us, and I will schedule a coffee and sit and have a conversation. That is not a Jesus. That is not a Jesus approach to anything. in my opinion, and there may be a ton of we may lose every subscriber we've got right now, but I don't think that's a Jesus approach to anything. So yeah,
Robert, our wives are still going to listen.
They will. We'll get those two. They'll be good.
Which, speaking of, and we're out of time, but our wives are getting together today.
Today,
they are, yeah. And I'm wondering what's behind that.
Maybe
they just like each other. Maybe they just like each other, but maybe there's a greater conspiracy here.
Hey, I was driving back from Appy State on Sunday, and you may have done this one, and I think you have, and I saw a church sign. And the best way to stop sunburn is to apply sunscreen.
That was a good one. I like that one.
That was terrible. But anyway, I saw that in the church driving home the other day, and I was thinking, I told Melissa, I was like, I've got to remember that one, and it popped in my brain here as we were closing out the show. But anyway, hey, just to kind of the closing thought for me on this, I'm super thankful that you've taken a couple of weeks because, I've told you in my life, I'm working through a Sabbath rhythm right now, and it's a very hard thing for me. So my Sabbath looks a little different than it will in a couple of years. But this is a really good conversation, and just being reminded to daily set aside some time that I'm sitting with the Father, to weekly get that Sabbath rhythm, and to yearly, even if it's something that the church doesn't approve, some long thing every few years, like that yearly I find a window, hopefully like a 5-day type of thing, but even if it's just a couple of days, that I can get away, read some scriptures, read some books, take a nap. There's some things that we have like burdened ourselves with somehow inside of rest and Sabbath, that I think that, like yesterday, you said earlier, I literally ate dinner and went to bed at 7:30. And I did not feel bad because I felt bad. And I had been up since 5, and I had worked all day, and I'd had a ton of stuff going on. I had worked literally right up till dinner, and I ate dinner. I sat down with my one kid who was at home, and the other 2 were out at somewhere. And so the 3 of us had dinner. And when my other 2 kids got home, I was well in bed and asleep and done. And I think we've got to give ourselves the freedom to sit inside of some of these spaces. And if you need an hour nap, take a nap. But, read, reflect, rest, let your mind, drive into the things of the Father and let that go there. And so I've loved this conversation, and I know we've got some other thoughts around this. I don't know if we'll continue this little mini series for a week or 2, but this has been a really helpful thing for me. So thanks for kind of driving this over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been great, and it's been something that has really got me thinking about where do there need to be changes in my own life and in my own rhythm of that as well. So, yeah, thanks for all of your insight into that over the last several weeks. And if you would have more insight into that you would like to share with us at the Small Church Podcast, we want to invite you to do so by joining the conversation on Facebook, on Instagram, or shoot us a line at higherministries.com. I want to thank you for listening and taking the time to dive into this. If you need help in looking into what a sabbatical looks like for you or for someone in your congregation under your leadership, reach out to us. We'd love to begin that conversation. Again, all work that we provide is completely free of charge, and we would love to be a resource to you and help you and plan something that could be life-changing for you and for your church. Again, like, subscribe, share our podcast, and we will be back with you again next week. Robert has to run and play Jumanji. I have to go and coach basketball, and we will talk to you again next week on the Small Church Podcast.